Hello all. Today we shall talk about Byzantine art. Let us understand what we shall be learning. Acquire the basic vocabulary, concept and criteria for understanding, interpreting and analyzing Byzantine art. Encounter significant works of the period and enable them to study later works influenced by this period. Understand and appreciate the role of values, beliefs and ideas in shaping Byzantine art. The lesson is divided as follows. I shall introduce you to the art of the period. Then we shall talk about Emperor Justinian in brief. Then the general characteristics of art of the period. Then we shall look at Hagia Sophia and San Vitale in greater detail. In scrolls and codes of the period, we shall look at the Vienna Genesis in greater detail. Lastly, we shall look at the icons of Byzantine art. Let us start with introduction. Byzantine art can be thought of broadly as the art of Constantinople, whose ancient name, before Constantine renamed it after himself, was Byzantium, and the regions under its influence. The early Byzantine period, most closely associated with the reign of Emperor Justinian I, 527 to 565, began in the 5th century and ended in 726. At the onset of the iconoclast controversy that led to the destruction of religious images. The Middle Byzantine period began in 843 when Empress Theodora, circa 810 to 867, reinstated the veneration of icons. It lasted until 1204 when Christian crusaders from the west occupied Constantinople. The late Byzantine period began with the restoration of Byzantine rule in 1261, ended with the empire's fall to the Ottoman Turks in 1453, at which point Russia succeeded Constantinople at the Third Rome and the center of Eastern Orthodox Church. Late Byzantine art continued to flourish into the 18th century in Ukraine, Russia, and much of southeastern Europe. During the 5th century, the western part of the Roman Empire was overrun by Germanic tribes from northern Europe. The Ostrogoths occupied the strategic Italian city of Ravenna until it was recaptured during the reign of the Byzantine Emperor Justinian in 540. Under Justinian, the Eastern Empire rose to political and artistic prominence. Emperor Justinian. It was during the 6th century under Emperor Justinian I and his wife Theodora that Byzantine political power, wealth and culture were at their peak. Imperial forces held northern Africa, Sicily, much of Italy and part of Spain. Ravenna became the Eastern Empire's administrative capital in the west, and Rome remained under nominal Byzantine control under the 8th century. Let's talk about the characteristics of the art. Byzantine art concerned itself solely with its religion. Its sole purpose was to translate the church theology into artistic terms. Since Byzantine architecture and painting remained uniform due to its development within a rigid tradition, the result was sophistication of the style, rarely equaled in Western art. Byzantine visual art began with mosaics, decorating the walls and domes of the churches, as well as fresco wall paintings. So beautiful was the effect of these mosaics that the form was taken up in Italy, especially in Rome and Ravenna. A less public art form, Constantinople, was the icon, from the Greek word ikon, meaning image. The holy image panel paintings, which were developed in the monasteries of the Eastern Church using encaustic wax paint on portable wooden panels. The greatest collection of this type of the early biblical art is in the monastery of the Saint Catherine in Sinai, founded in 6th century by Emperor Justinian. During the period 1050 to 1200, tensions grew up between the Eastern Roman Empire and slowly re-emerging city of Rome, whose popes had managed by careful diplomatic maneuvering to retain their authority as the center of Western Christendom. At the same time, Italian city-states like Venice were becoming rich on international trade. As a result, in 1204, Constantinople fell under the influence of Venetians. This duly led to a cultural exodus of renowned artists from the city back to Rome. The reverse of what had happened 800 years previously and the beginnings of the Proto-Renaissance period, exemplified by Giotto da Bonadon's chapel frescoes. However, even as it declined, Byzantine influence continued to make itself felt in the 13th and 14th centuries, notably in the Sienese school of painting and the International Gothic style 1375 and 1450, notably in International Gothic illuminations like the Tres Riche Horace du Duc de Berry by Limburg brothers. Hagia Sophia. The undisputed architectural masterpieces of Justinian reign is the centrally planned church of Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. It was dedicated to Christ as the personification of the holy Hagia, wisdom Sophia. It replaced a 4th century church destroyed when crowds spurred on by Justinian's foes during the devastating urban revolt in 532, set the old church on fire and cornered the emperor within his palace. Two scholar theoreticians, Anthemius of Tralles, specialist in geometry and optics, and Isidorus of Miletus, a specialist in physics who had also studied vaulting, were commissioned by Justinian. In their design, they successfully combined elements of basilica with enormous rising vaults. Hagia Sophia is an innovative hybrid of longitudinal and central architectural planning. The central dome is placed above four arches at right angle to each other. The arches are supported by four huge piers which are barely noticeable from the inside because the arches meet at corners. The dome rests on four pendentives, triangular segments with concave sides, providing a transition from a square or a polygonal plane to the round base of a dome or intervening dome, and they allow the architect to design larger and lighter domes. Pendentives are the principal Byzantine contribution to monumental architecture, and the central dome of Hagia Sophia is the earliest example of their use on such a grand scale. Hagia Sophia's dome was constructed of a single layer of brick, a relatively thin shell that minimized the weight borne by the pendentives. At the eastern and western ends of the square, two semicircles are topped by small half domes. Surrounding each half dome are three semicircular apses with open arcades surmounted by even smaller half domes. Running from east to west along the axis are colonnaded side aisles on the first level and colonnaded galleries on the second level. Both are covered by groin walls. Were it not for the central square, Hagia Sophia would resemble a typical centrally planned church, albeit on the massive scale. Not the impressive effect created by open space of the nave, the high central dome, and the smaller half domes. On the north and south sides of the nave, there are walls below the arches. The extensive use of windows and arcades in Hagia Sophia creates an overwhelming impression of light and space. At the floor level, fine arches connect the side aisles with the nave. Supporting these arches are large columns with intricately patterned capitals reminiscent of interlace. The small walls reflect the persistence of classical elements, although in the rudimentary form. Here, they have been overtaken by dazzling Byzantine patterns. At the second level, the galleries contain 7 arches. The lunettes, the semicircular wall surface just below the top of the arches, have 2 rows of windows, 5/7. In each of the half domes, there are 5 windows. Finally, a series of small windows encircling the bottom edge or the dome permits rays of light to enter from all directions. Hagia Sophia was essentially an impartial building, the personal church of the emperor and his court, rather than a place of worship for the whole community. The clergy occupied one half of the central space and the emperor and his attendants the other. San Vitale. Ravenna's most important Justinian church was dedicated to Saint Vitale in Italian, a Roman slave and Christian martyr who became the object of growing cult from the end of the 4th century. The exterior of St. Vitale is faced with plain brick, unbroken except by buttresses and windows, and the interior is richly decorated with mosaics and marble. In both respects, it is like early Christian basilica. The interior is suffused with the glow of yellow light resulting from the prevalence of gold mosaic decoration. Byzantine style of art a special note. The mature Byzantine style evolved through the stylization and standardization of late classical forms of early Christian art, was based on dynamic line and flat areas of color rather than form. Individual features were suppressed in favor of a standard facial type. Figures were flattened and draperies were reduced to patterns of swirling lines. The total effect was one of the disembodiment, the three-dimensional representation of an individual human figure replaced by a spiritual presence, the force of which depended upon vigor of line and brilliance of color. The Byzantine image was at once more remote and more immediate than the naturalistic classical one. The effect of immediacy was increased by the severely frontal pose and Byzantine facial type, with its huge eyes and penetrating gaze, and by the characteristic use of a gold background, which in picture is isolated figures, made the image appear to be suspended somewhere between the wall and the viewer. There were many mosaics in church. The mosaic here shows a young, beardless Christ in purple robes of royalty, drawn in the Western Apollonian style. His halo contains an image of the cross, and he is seated on a globe flanked by two angels and hands a jeweled crown to Saint Vitale. Bishop Ecclesius on the right is seen holding a model of the church, while the landscape is Hellenistic and Roman, along with suggestions of shading in figure and draperies. The representation is more conceptual than natural. The mosaic does not show any organic bodily movement, and figures are frontal. Look at this mosaic also. The central figure, Emperor Justinian, wears the same royal purple as Christ in the apse. On Justinian's left, the viewer's right, Archbishop Maximian wears a gold cloak and holds a jeweled cross. He is identified by an inscription and surrounded by three other members of clergy. On Justinian's right are two court officials and his military guard. The large green shield is decorated with Constantine's chi-rho. The intention of this mosaic was clearly to depict Justinian's Christ's representation on the earth, to show him as worthy successor to Constantine, to express his power as head of both church and state. Here, Theodora stands in an abbreviated apse, with her court ladies on the right and two churchmen on the left. She also wears a royal purple robe. and her head is framed by a halo. The importance of light in Christian art is expressed in Byzantine mosaics by the predominance of gold backgrounds and reflecting surface of the tracery. Also at Hagia Sophia, Hagia Sophia in Kiev, Cathedral of St. Mark in Venice, Church of Christ in Chora for Middle and later Byzantine architecture and mosaics. Scrolls and Codex. Since people began to write some 5,000 years ago, they have kept records on a variety of materials, including clay or wax tablets, pieces of broken pottery, papyrus, animal skins, and paper books have taken two forms: scroll and codex. Scrolls could be written to be read either horizontally or vertically. The Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans had already used the papyrus scroll rotulus for text and their illustrations. The thickness and weight of parchment and vellum made it impractical to produce a very large manuscript, such as an entire Bible, in a single volume. As a result, individual sections were made into separate books. Until the invention of printing in 15th century, all books were manuscripts, that is, they were written by hand. Manuscripts often included illustrations called miniatures, from minimum, the Latin word for reddish lead pigment. Manuscripts decorated with gold and colors were said to be illuminated. The Vienna Genesis was one of the earliest codex to illustrate scenes from the Bible. The Codex originally had 96 folios, leaves or pages, of which 24 survive. Each sheet is purple, pointing to an imperial pattern, while the gold and silver script is characteristically Byzantine. Most of the page contains text and the images are at the bottom. Narrative is continuous without frames or dividers between scenes. The entire story of Rebecca at the well in Genesis 24 appears here in a single composition. The painters illustrates the continuous narrative tradition that sometimes combine events that take place at different times in the story within a single narrative space. Rebecca, the heroine, appears at the left walking away from the walled city of Nahor with a large jug on her shoulder, going to fetch water. A colonnaded road leads towards a spring personified by a reclining pagan water nymph who holds a flowing jar. In the foreground, Rebecca appears again. Her jug now full, she encounters a thirsty camel driver and offers him water to drink. Icons. During the 8th century, mounting discomfort with the place of icons in the Christian devotion grew into a major controversy in the Byzantine world. And in 726, Emperor Leo III imposed iconoclasm. The halt to iconoclasm, the destructive campaign against images and those who believed in them, came in 843. The disposition of images in churches was codified and generally adhered to a set of iconography. The great Mosaic circle were deployed about the Pantocrator, Christ in his role as ruler and judge, central in the main dome, and the Virgin and Child in the apse. Below the main events of the Christian year, from Annunciation to Crucifixion and Resurrection, had their appointed places. Below again, hieratic figures of saints, martyrs, and bishops were ranked in order. In Greece, the Church of Dormition at Daphne near Athens, of about 1100, presents some of the finest mosaics of the period. There is a grave classic sense of great delicacy in its crucifixion, while the dome mosaic of the Pantocrator is one of the most formidable in any Byzantine church. In Venice, the huge expenses of S. Marco, begun 1063, were decorated by artists imported from the East, but their work was largely destroyed by fire in 1106, and later work by Venetian craftsmen is in a less pure style. In the cathedral on the nearby island of Torcello, however, the Virgin and Child, tall, lovely, and solitary as a spire against the vast cold space of apse, is 12th century survival. In Sicily, the first Norman king, Roger II, ruled 1130 to 1054, was actively hostile to the Byzantine Empire, yet he imported Greek artists who created one of the finest mosaic cycles ever. In the apse and presbytery at Cephalou, the permeation of Byzantine art into Russia was initiated in 989 by the marriage of Vladimir of Kiev with the Byzantine princess Anna, and his conversion to Eastern Christianity. Byzantine Mosaics were working in Hagia Sophia at Kiev by the 1040s, and the Byzantine impact on Russian medieval painting remained crucial along after the fall of Constantinople.